They called her a fool. They said she was walking away from a dynasty, leaving a $10 million estate in the Hamptons with nothing but the clothes on her back and a beat-up sedan. Everyone thought she had lost her mind. But they didn't know what was happening behind those closed oak doors. They didn't know that the perfect marriage was a prison disguised as a paradise. And they certainly didn't know that the homeless man she would share a sandwich with in a rainy parking lot was about to hand her the keys to the world. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a revenge story. The ink on the divorce papers was still wet, glistening under the cold LED lights of the lawyer's office in downtown Manhattan. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Mrs. Patrick?" the lawyer, Mr. Holloway, asked. He adjusted his rimless glasses, looking at Madeline with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "If you sign this, you waive your right to alimony. You waive the claim to the Patrick Family Trust. You leave with, essentially, what you came in with." Madeline looked at the mahogany table. She looked at Grant Patrick, the man she had spent the last 6 years with. He was checking his Rolex, looking bored. He wasn't even looking at her. He was typing something on his BlackBerry. Yes, he still used one for security reasons, likely texting her. The 22-year-old intern, Jessica, who had been working late with him for the past 8 months. "I don't want his money," Madeline said, her voice trembling, but her spine steel. "I don't want the house in Greenwich. I don't want the apartment in Paris. I just want out." Grant finally looked up. His handsome face, the one that graced the cover of Forbes as a real estate mogul to watch, twisted into a sneer. "Let her sign, Holloway. She thinks she's being noble. She'll be back crawling on her knees within a month. She doesn't know how to survive without my credit card." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Madeline could hear. "You're nothing without me, Maddie. You're a failed graphic designer from Ohio. I made you." That was the spark. That was the moment the fear evaporated and was replaced by a cold, hard rage. Madeline grabbed the pen. She didn't just sign. She carved her name into the paper. Madeline Burke. Not Patrick. Never again, Patrick. "I'm keeping the Jeep," she said, standing up. Grant laughed. "The 2018 Wrangler. Be my guest. It's got a transmission leak anyway." She walked out of the high-rise building on 5th Avenue and into the biting November wind of New York City. She didn't look back. She had no plan. She had $400 in a hidden cash stash inside her boot, a suitcase of clothes in the trunk, and a car that smelled like burnt oil. She drove to the Holland Tunnel, her hands shaking on the wheel. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the bank. Joint account frozen. Grant hadn't even waited for her to leave the city limits. She was 32 years old. She had no job, no home, and the man she loved had turned into a monster. But as she merged onto the I-95, driving away from the glittering skyline, she felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years. She could breathe. 3 weeks later, the reality of freedom had set in, and it tasted like stale coffee and fear. Madeline had driven south, aiming for somewhere warmer, somewhere cheaper. She ended up in a gritty industrial town on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. It was far enough from New York that nobody knew the name Patrick, and close enough to a city that she hoped she could find work. But Grant had been thorough. When she applied for a rental apartment, the landlord ran a credit check. It came back flagged for suspicious activity, a parting gift from Grant's lawyers, no doubt tying up her identity and fraud alerts to punish her. No apartment complex would touch her. She was living in the Jeep. She parked in the back corner of a 24-hour Walmart supercenter lot, wedged between an RV and a dumpster to block the wind. She used the public restrooms to wash her face and brush her teeth. She ate peanut butter out of the jar. The transmission leak Grant had joked about was real. The Jeep was dying. She couldn't drive it to job interviews anymore. She had to walk. It was a Tuesday, raining that kind of sideways rain that soaks you to the bone in seconds. Madeline was walking back from a diner where the manager had looked at her wet clothes and messy hair and told her they weren't hiring, even though a help wanted sign was taped to the window. She was shivering, huddled under the awning of a closed gas station, counting the $7 she had left. That's when she saw him. There was an old man sitting on the curb near the air pump. He looked worse off than she did. He wore a torn flannel jacket that was 3 sizes too big, and his boots were held together with silver duct tape. He was coughing, a wet, rattling cough that sounded like death. People were walking past him. A guy in a BMW pulled up to the pump, looked at the old man with disgust, and deliberately turned his back while he filled his tank. Madeline's heart ached. She knew that look. She had received that look from her own husband. She looked at her $7. It was enough for a hot meal at the fast food joint across the street, or gas to run the heater in the Jeep for a night. She didn't think. She just moved. She walked across the street to the Burger King, bought 2 Whoppers and 2 large coffees. It cost her $6.50. She walked back to the gas station and sat down on the wet curb next to the man. "Hey," she said softly. The man flinched, pulling his jacket tighter. He looked up. His eyes were startlingly blue, piercing through the grime on his face and the grey beard. He looked suspicious. "I don't have any money, lady." "I'm not asking for money," Madeline said. She unwrapped a burger and handed it to him. "I'm just hungry, and I hate eating alone." The man stared at the burger. His hands, weathered and shaking, reached out and took it. He took a bite, then another, devouring it with a desperation that made Madeline want to cry. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the rain hit the pavement. "I'm Martha," the man finally mumbled. "I'm Maddie," she said. "You don't look like you belong on a curb, Maddie," Martha said, sipping the coffee. His voice was rough, but his diction was surprisingly clear. "Looks can be deceiving," she replied with a bitter laugh. "I'm living in my car over at the Walmart. My ex-husband froze my life. I'm nobody." Martha looked at her, really looked at her. "Nobody is nobody," he said cryptically. "Why did you buy me this? You have nothing." "Because," Madeline said, staring at the BMW driving away, "I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I promised myself that if I ever got out of my marriage, I'd never look through people the way he did." Martha finished his coffee. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rusted metal washer. Just a piece of junk hardware. "Here," he said, pressing it into her hand. "What is this?" "Insurance," Martha said. He stood up, groaning as his knees popped. "If you ever find yourself in real trouble, go to the building with the glass spire in downtown Charlotte. The Dominion Tower. Give this to the guard at the front desk. Tell him Martha sent you." Madeline smiled sadly. The old man was clearly delusional. The Dominion Tower was the headquarters of Kensington Logistics, one of the biggest shipping conglomerates in the world. "Okay, Martha," she said gently, pocketing the washer so she wouldn't hurt his feelings. "I'll do that." "You're a good kid, Maddie," he said. He turned and walked into the rain, disappearing into the shadows of the alleyway. Madeline went back to her Jeep, cold and hungry, with 50 cents to her name. She fell asleep, crying, clutching the rusted washer, wondering if she would freeze to death before the morning. 2 days later, the Jeep finally died. It happened at an intersection in the middle of rush hour. The engine seized with a horrific grinding noise, smoke billowing out of the hood. Horns blared behind her. People screamed insults. "Move it, trash!" someone yelled. She couldn't afford a tow truck. She had to abandon the car. She grabbed her suitcase, her only remaining possession, and dragged it to the sidewalk. She was officially homeless. She spent the next 3 nights in a women's shelter. It was loud, dangerous, and terrifying. On the 4th morning, she was walking downtown, trying to find a library to use the internet, when she saw a commotion. A massive crowd had gathered outside a luxury hotel. Paparazzi were flashing cameras. A black limousine was idling at the curb. Madeline stopped. Her heart stopped. Stepping out of the hotel was Grant. He was in Charlotte. Why was he here? And then she saw the banner above the hotel entrance. Patrick Real Estate acquires historic Charlotte waterfront. He was expanding. He was buying up the city she had fled to. Grant looked immaculate in his charcoal suit. He was laughing, his arm around Jessica, the intern. Jessica was wearing a diamond necklace that looked suspiciously like the one Grant had given Madeline for their 3rd anniversary, the one he claimed had been lost during the move. Panic seized Madeline. If he saw her, disheveled, wearing dirty clothes, carrying a suitcase, he wouldn't just laugh. He would destroy her. He would have her arrested for vagrancy, just for the sport of it. She turned to run, but in her panic, she tripped over her own suitcase. She fell hard onto the concrete, scraping her hands and knees. The commotion drew attention. "Look at that junkie," a photographer shouted, snapping a picture of her on the ground. Grant turned. He looked right at her. For a second, there was no recognition. Then his eyes widened. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He began to walk toward her. "Well, well," Grant's voice boomed. "If it isn't the runaway bride." The crowd went silent, sensing the drama. "Look at you, Maddie," Grant said, standing over her. I told you you'd be nothing. Do you want $5? Is that what you want?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $5 bill, and crumpled it. He threw it at her face. "Pick it up," he commanded. "Dance for your dinner, Maddie." Jessica giggled in the background. Madeline felt a heat rising in her chest that was hotter than shame. She stood up, ignoring the money. "Go to hell, Grant." "I own this city now," Grant hissed. "I can have you banned from every shelter within 50 miles. I can make you disappear." Suddenly, a black SUV screeched to a halt right next to them. It wasn't a limo. It was a tactical, armored vehicle. 2 large men in suits with earpieces jumped out. They didn't look like hotel security. They looked like military. "Mom?" one of the men said, stepping between Madeline and Grant. He was built like a tank. "Excuse me," Grant said, indignant. "I'm talking to this woman. Do you know who I am? I'm Grant Patrick." The security guard ignored him completely. He turned to Madeline. "Ms. Burke, we've been looking for you all morning. The CEO is asking for you." Madeline was stunned. "The CEO, I don't—" "He said you have the washer," the guard said. Madeline froze. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed the cold, rusted metal she had kept, mostly out of habit. She pulled it out. The guard nodded. "Please, get in the car." "Wait a minute," Grant shouted, grabbing Madeline's arm. "She's my wife. You can't just—" The guard moved with a speed that was terrifying. In one motion, he removed Grant's hand from Madeline's arm and shoved him back. Grant stumbled and fell onto the red carpet, right in front of the paparazzi. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the humiliating fall of the great Grant Patrick. "Ms. Burke is a VIP guest of Kensington Logistics," the guard stated coldly. "Touch her again, and you'll be dealing with legal counsel that costs more than your entire portfolio." The guard opened the back door of the armored SUV. Madeline looked at Grant, sprawling on the ground, red-faced and sputtering. She looked at the luxury car. She got in. The interior was silent and smelled of rich leather. As the car pulled away, leaving her past life on the sidewalk, a partition slid down. Sitting there, wearing a bespoke Italian suit, clean-shaven, and looking 20 years younger than the man at the gas station, was Martha. He wasn't coughing. "Hello, Maddie," he smiled, his blue eyes twinkling. "I believe you dropped this wrapper the other night." He held up the Burger King wrapper. "Best meal I've had in years." "Martha," she whispered. Who are you?" "My name is Martha Kensington," he said, "owner of Kensington Logistics, and I have a proposition for you." The armored SUV slipped through Charlotte's late afternoon traffic like a ghost. Outside, the world still roared, horns, engines, shouting, but inside the vehicle it felt sealed off from reality. The thick glass muted everything. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the engine and the soft clink of crystal as the man across from Madeline took another sip of sparkling water. Madeline couldn't take her eyes off him. Just an hour ago, he had been sitting on the pavement outside the Patrick Hargrave building, drenched in cold rain, wrapped in tattered layers, holding out a paper cup with a trembling hand. Now, he sat in a tailored charcoal suit that looked like it belonged in the corner office of a skyscraper. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture straight, his expression composed. The transformation was unreal. "Martha Kensington," Madeline said again, almost to convince herself it was real. It was a name that carried weight. Kensington Logistics was everywhere. Trucks on the highways, ships in the ports, cargo planes in the sky. They handled global freight, defense contracts, pharmaceuticals, infrastructure. $40 billion of reach and power. The kind of company that didn't just move goods, it moved governments. And this man had just told her it was his. "But why?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "Why were you out there like that? Why pretend to be homeless?" Martha placed the glass gently in the holder between them. Up close, Madeline could see the years etched into his face. He looked like a man who had seen too much, carried too much, and never had the luxury of setting any of it down, because he had built a world. "I am dying, Madeline," he said simply. Her breath caught in her throat. He didn't soften it, didn't try to make it sound poetic or distant. He said it like a fact he had already accepted. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," he continued, tapping lightly over his chest. 6 months, maybe less. That's what the doctors told me. The words seemed to press against the air in the SUV, making it harder to breathe. Madeline had lost things, her marriage, her security, her dignity. But this was different. This was a man facing the end of his life, speaking about it with the calm of someone who had already made peace with the inevitable. "And I have a problem," Martha said. "I built Kensington Logistics from nothing. $40 billion, ports, rail lines, airfields, 30,000 employees. But I have no children, no one to leave it to. My wife passed away 10 years ago. The board?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "They're waiting for my heart to stop so they can carve the company up and sell it off to the highest bidder. They don't care about the people. They don't care about what I built. Only the money." He turned his gaze to the window, watching the city pass by. "I needed an heir. Someone who understands what it means to have nothing, so they never forget the people who still live that way." He looked back at her. "I spent a week on the streets," he said. 42 people walked past me. Some ignored me. Some insulted me. One kicked my cup over. You were the only one who stopped, the only one who sat down. The only one who shared what little you had. Madeline swallowed hard. She remembered that moment. The cold rain, the exhaustion, the way he had looked so fragile, so small. She hadn't thought about it as anything heroic. It had just felt human. "I'm not what you think I am," she said. "I'm not a leader. I'm not a CEO. I made marketing brochures and website layouts. I stayed with a man who treated me like I was nothing for 6 years. I didn't fight him. I just left." "That's not strength." Martha's voice sharpened. "Weakness is staying in the cage when the door is open," he said. "You walked out. That takes more courage than you realize." "And business?" He leaned back. "Business is psychology and numbers. I can teach you the numbers. You already have the psychology." The SUV turned down a private drive, the sleek glass tower of Dominion Tower rising ahead of them. Madeline stared at it, her reflection faint in the tinted window. She saw the tired woman she'd become, the one who had been pushed out of a marriage with nothing but a leaking Jeep and a suitcase. Then she remembered Grant's voice. "You're nothing without me." The SUV rolled into the underground entrance, slowing to a stop beneath the tower. Martha turned to face her fully. "I'm not offering you charity," he said. "I'm offering you a position. You start as my executive assistant. You shadow me. You learn everything. How this world really works. How men like your husband think. How power moves. And if you can handle it, if you can survive the next 6 months, I will leave Kensington Logistics to you, the entire company." Madeline felt the weight of his words settle over her. Everything. Her mind flashed back to the rain, the humiliation, the cold dismissal, the feeling of being erased. She had nothing left to lose. "He's trying to buy the waterfront development in Charlotte," she said quietly. "Grant. That's why he was here." "I know," Martha replied with a faint smile. "He's stretched himself thin. Borrowed heavily from Swiss banks. He needs the zoning permits approved next month, or his entire deal collapses." Madeline's hands tightened in her lap. "Teach me," she said. Martha studied her for a long, silent moment. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. Because for the first time in years, Madeline wasn't running from her past. She was preparing to conquer it. The transition from Madeline Burke, the discarded wife, to Ava Kensington, the crown princess of a global empire, was not a glamorous makeover. It was a demolition. To build the woman who could command 30,000 employees, Martha Kensington had to first tear down the woman who had been conditioned to say sorry for taking up space. "You move like you're waiting for permission to exist," Martha barked at her on her 3rd day in the Dominion Tower. He was sitting in a high-tech medical chair in his office, a nasal cannula providing him oxygen, but his eyes were as sharp as bayonets. "Stop it! In this building, you are the permission." Madeline's training was a relentless, 20-hour-a-day immersion into the dark arts of high finance and logistics. Martha didn't give her textbooks. He gave her real-world crises. He would wake her at 3 a.m., tossing a thick folder onto her bed. "The port workers in Singapore are threatening a wildcat strike," he'd growl. "We have 4 container ships carrying time-sensitive medical isotopes that will expire in 72 hours. If we miss the window, we lose $80 million, and, more importantly, hospitals in 3 countries lose their supplies. You have 20 minutes to draft a negotiation strategy. Go." At first, Madeline crumbled. She cried in the marble bathroom of her penthouse suite, staring at her reflection. But every time she felt like quitting, she would look at the small, rusted washer sitting on her nightstand. She would remember the smell of the rain on the curb and the sound of Grant's laughter as he threw $5 at her. The tears would dry, replaced by a cold, vibrating hum of ambition. She began to change physically. The mousy, shoulder-length brown hair was chopped into a razor-sharp, icy blonde bob that framed her face like a weapon. She traded her oversized sweaters for power suits, Saint Laurent and Armani, tailored so perfectly they felt like a second skin. She learned to walk with a rhythmic, heavy click of her heels, a sound that signaled her arrival before she even entered a room. "Names have power," Martha told her one evening as they shared a simple meal of broth and crackers, the only thing his failing body could handle. "Madeleine Burke is a victim. She is a woman who was cheated on and thrown out. But Ava? Ava is a Norse name. It means life. It means bird. It means power. From today, Madeleine is dead. You are Ava Kensington." Under her new identity, Ava began to shadow Martha in every boardroom meeting. The board members, men like Geoffrey Thorne and Arthur Patrick, no relation to Grant, though just as arrogant, looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. They saw a charity case, a pretty face Martha was keeping around in his dotage. Ava said nothing. She sat behind Martha, a legal pad on her lap, taking notes. But she wasn't just taking notes on the business. She was mapping the board's weaknesses. She noted that Geoffrey had a gambling problem, masked as stock speculation. She saw that Arthur was embezzling from the employee pension fund to pay for his daughter's equestrian career. She was collecting stones to throw later. Meanwhile, she kept a secret file on Grant Patrick. Grant was spiraling. The Charlotte waterfront project was a massive undertaking, and he had underestimated the complexity of the city's environmental regulations. He was desperate. "He's reaching out to the Blackstone Group," Ava reported to Martha one afternoon. "He's looking for a bridge loan. He's offering 30% equity in Patrick Global as collateral." Martha coughed into a handkerchief, the white fabric coming away stained with dark blood. He didn't have much time left. "And what is our move, Ava?" "Blackstone will vet him too thoroughly," Ava said, her voice now a smooth, low-register command. "He's too messy for them. He needs someone who doesn't ask questions. He needs a white knight who is actually a Trojan horse. We set up a shell company, Apex Holdings. We approach him through a third-party broker in the Caymans. We offer him the money, but we demand 49% equity and a personal guarantee on all his assets." Martha looked at her, a slow, proud smile spreading across his pale face. "A personal guarantee? You want to take his house too?" "I want him to lose the very floor he stands on," Ava said coldly. "I want him to feel the wind on his face, the way I did when he pushed me out of that limo." In those final months, the bond between the dying Titan and the rising Phoenix became unbreakable. Martha saw in Ava the daughter he never had. Ava saw in Martha the father who finally taught her her own worth. One night, Martha called her to his bedside. The machines were beeping steadily, the only sound in the vast, darkened room. He reached out a frail hand and took hers. "The board. They will try to kill you the moment I'm gone," Martha whispered. "They think you are a fluke. Show them you are the storm. Don't be fair, Ava. Be effective. And remember, the washer." "I remember, Martha," she said, tears finally breaking through her armor. Martha Kensington passed away at 4:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. The news hit the global markets like an earthquake. By 9 a.m., the board of directors had already convened an emergency meeting to vote on a successor and begin the process of selling Kensington Logistics to a German conglomerate. Geoffrey Thorne stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking at his watch. "Well, let's get this over with. We'll appoint an interim CEO, file the SEC paperwork, and by Friday, we'll all be 20% richer." "I wouldn't update your bank balance just yet, Geoffrey," A voice rang out from the doorway. The board members turned. Ava stood there, dressed in a black suit so dark it seemed to swallow the light. She wasn't carrying a notepad anymore. She was carrying a leather briefcase and a heavy, legal-sized envelope. "Who let you in here?" Arthur Patrick snarled. "The funeral isn't until Thursday. You're done here, girl. Security will have your things packed by noon." Ava didn't flinch. She walked to the head of the table, Martha's chair, and sat down. The silence in the room was deafening. "Martha Kensington didn't leave this company to the board," Ava said, her voice echoing with the same gravitas Martha once held. He held 51% of the voting shares in a private trust. "I am the sole trustee of that trust, and as of 5 minutes ago, I have exercised my right to dissolve this board and appoint a new committee of my choosing." "This is an outrage!" Jeffrey slammed his fist on the table. "You're a nobody. You have no experience. We will fight this in court for a decade." Ava leaned forward, tossing the legal envelope onto the table. "Page 1 is my appointment as trustee. Page 2 is a list of the gambling debts you've been paying off using the company's offshore tax haven, Jeffrey. And page 3. Well, Arthur, page 3 is a detailed ledger of the $2 million missing from the pension fund. If you want to fight me in court, we can start with your criminal trials." The color drained from the room. These men, who had spent decades bullying subordinates, were suddenly staring at a predator they hadn't seen coming. "Now," Ava said, clicking her gold pen. "The first item on the agenda is the acquisition of Patrick Global. We're going to offer them a deal they can't refuse. And then we're going to destroy them." She looked out the window at the city below, her eyes cold and clear. The training was over. The war had begun. The champagne in Grant Patrick's glass was the color of liquid gold, and to him it tasted like victory. He stood on the balcony of his Miami penthouse, looking out over the Biscayne Bay. Behind him, the bass of a high-end sound system thrummed through the floorboards. Jessica was there, draped over a velvet sofa, showing off a new Cartier bracelet to her followers on a live stream. "We're back, baby," Grant whispered to the wind. 2 weeks ago, he had been staring into the abyss. His creditors were circling like sharks, and the Charlotte waterfront project, the jewel in his crown, was days away from being seized. But then, a miracle had appeared in the form of Apex Holdings. They were a private equity group out of the Caymans, and they had moved with a speed that made his head spin. They didn't care about his falling stock prices. They only cared about the land. They had wired $50 million into his escrow account with a single click. "Grant, honey," Jessica called out, not looking up from her phone. The guy from the construction site called again. "Something about a stop work order?" Grant waved his hand dismissively. "Probably just a permit glitch. I'll throw some money at the city inspector tomorrow. It's fine. Everything is fine." But everything was not fine. 300 miles away, in a darkened office at the top of the Dominion Tower, Madeline Burke, now known to the world as Ava Kensington, watched a series of monitors. On one screen was a live feed of the Charlotte construction site. It was ghost quiet. Not a single crane moved. "Is the union lead on board?" Madeline asked. "Big Mike is satisfied," Elflida, her COO, replied from the shadows. "The safety concerns we flagged were technically legitimate, even if they were minor. But with the union refusing to cross the picket line until every single bolt is re-inspected, Patrick won't meet the Phase 1 deadline. He's already 48 hours behind." Madeline leaned back, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screens. "And the Swiss banks?" "They've been notified that Patrick's primary funding source is now a high-interest bridge loan with a predatory default trigger. They're pulling his secondary lines of credit as we speak. He's being squeezed from both ends." "Good," Madeline said. "Wait for the clock to hit midnight on the 15th. Then send the notice." The downfall of Grant Patrick didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a series of frantic phone calls that he couldn't answer. By the time Grant flew back to his headquarters in New York, the atmosphere in the building had changed. The receptionists wouldn't look him in the eye. The air felt cold. He stormed into his executive suite, his face flushed and sweating. "Where is Holloway?" Grant screamed at his assistant. "Why aren't the phones working? Why did my corporate card get declined at the airport?" "Mr. Patrick," the assistant stammered, backing away. There's a representative from Apex Holdings in your office. She's been waiting since 6 a.m. "Finally!" Grant straightened his tie, regaining a flicker of his old arrogance. "I'll handle this. They probably just want to renegotiate the interest. Bankers always get cold feet when the unions start acting up." He threw open the double oak doors of his office. "Look, I don't know who sent you, but if you think you can intimidate me into—" The words died in his throat. The woman sitting in his high-backed leather chair didn't look like a banker. She was dressed in a white Alexander McQueen suit that looked like it had been carved out of marble. Her hair was a sharp, icy blonde bob, and her eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses. She was slowly spinning a gold pen between her fingers, the same gold pen Grant's father had given him when he took over the company. "Get out of my chair," Grant snapped, though a cold shiver was starting to crawl up his spine. "Who are you? Where is the managing director of Apex?" The woman slowly reached up and removed her sunglasses. Grant took a step back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The face was familiar, but the soul behind the eyes was unrecognizable. Gone was the soft, trembling girl who used to apologize for the weather. In her place was something forged in a furnace. "Maddie," he breathed. "The name on the contract is Madeline Burke," she said. Her voice was a calm, lethal melody. "But for the purposes of this meeting, I am the managing director of Apex Holdings, and as of midnight, I am your primary creditor." Grant began to laugh, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You? Apex? Don't be ridiculous. You don't have $10 to your name. I saw you. You were a beggar. You were living in a Jeep." Madeline didn't blink. She slid a document across the desk. It was the original loan agreement Grant had signed in his drunken haze of celebration in Miami. "Paragraph 14, Section B, Grant," she said. "The bad actor clause. It states that if the guarantor, that's you, is found to have misrepresented the safety conditions of the collateral site to induce funding, the loan is immediately callable in full, and if payment isn't rendered within 12 hours, the collateral reverts to the lender." "Safety conditions?" Grant stammered. "What are you talking about?" "The union strike wasn't just about wages, Grant. It was about the fact that your foreman was using substandard steel in the foundation to save costs. I have the lab reports. I have the photos. And I have the testimony of your lead engineer." Grant's face went from red to a sickly, translucent white. You set me up. You sabotaged the site." "I simply shone a light on the corners where you were cutting," Madeline replied. She stood up, walking around the desk. She was taller than him now, or perhaps she just stood with a grace he could no longer command. "You were so desperate for the money that you didn't check who was giving it to you. You thought the world was full of people as greedy as you are." "I'll sue you." Grant lunged for the papers on the desk. "This won't hold up in court. You're my wife. This is marital property." "We're divorced, Grant. You made sure of that. You made sure I walked away with nothing, remember?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you forgot one thing about Martha Kensington. He didn't just have money. He had a memory. He remembered a girl who gave him her last $5, and he made sure that girl had the resources to finish what you started. She tapped the desk. This office? Gone? The Greenwich house? Already being appraised? The cars? Towed this morning. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal effects before security escorts you from the building. You can't do this, Grant whimpered. He fell into a guest chair, the one where he usually made his victims sit. Maddie, please. We were a team. I can help you run this. You don't know the business like I do. You need me. Madeline looked at him with genuine pity. Not the kind of pity that leads to forgiveness, but the kind you feel for a fallen animal. I don't need a snake to teach me how to walk, Grant. She turned toward the door. 2 massive security guards, the same men who had rescued her from the sidewalk months ago, stepped into the room. Mr. Patrick is leaving, Madeline said. Ensure he only takes what belongs to him, which, according to the inventory I've run, is a single briefcase and the suit on his back. Wait! Grant screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. What about the waterfront? What about my legacy? Madeline paused at the door, looking back one last time. The waterfront will be completed, she said. But it won't have your name on it. It's being renamed the Martha Kensington Memorial Park. It's going to be a low-income housing complex with a free clinic and a job placement center. Your legacy is being paved over with something useful. As the guards dragged a screaming, sobbing Grant Patrick toward the freight elevator, Madeline walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. She looked out at the New York skyline. She was no longer the girl in the Jeep. She was the storm, and the storm was just beginning to blow. Grant Patrick laughed. It was a hollow, incredulous sound that bounced off the glass walls of his corner office. He tossed the blue folder onto the desk as if it were a piece of junk mail. "This is a joke," Grant sneered, leaning back in his leather chair, though his knuckles were white as he gripped the armrests. "You think you can walk in here, wearing a suit that costs more than your father's house, and pretend you own my company? Maddie, you're delusional. I have lawyers. I have security. You have nothing," Madeline cut him off. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a peculiar weight to it, like a stone dropping into a deep well. "And stop calling me Maddie. My name is Ms. Burke, or if you prefer, Boss." She tapped the folder he had discarded. "You didn't read page 42, Grant. The cross-collateralization clause. When you signed the emergency funding agreement with Apex Holdings, you were so desperate to save the waterfront project and your reputation that you didn't notice the definitions section." Grant blinked, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "Definitions?" "We defined collateral not just as the waterfront development," Madeline explained, pacing slowly around the room, running her hand along the bookshelves she used to dust when she visited him at work. "We defined it as any and all assets, real or liquid, held by the primary guarantor. You put everything on the table, Grant. The Greenwich estate, the Paris apartment, the stocks, the vintage car collection, even your retirement accounts." Grant stood up so fast his chair toppled over. "That's illegal. That's entrapment." "It's binding," Madeline corrected. "And since you defaulted on the Phase 1 construction milestone yesterday at 5 p.m., the transfer of ownership triggered automatically. As of this morning, I own the building we are standing in. I own the house you sleep in. I even own the lease on that ridiculous limousine waiting downstairs." Grant looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape route. He looked at Jessica, who was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "Jessica," Grant barked, "call my lawyer. Get Halloway on the phone now." Jessica looked up, popping her gum. She didn't move to dial. She looked at Grant, then at Madeline. She saw the shift in power. Jessica wasn't smart in business, but she had a survival instinct that was razor-sharp. "He's not picking up, Grant," Jessica said, her voice bored. "I tried calling him 10 minutes ago when the security guys locked the elevators. He sent a text. It just said, 'Conflict of interest.'" "Conflict of interest?" Grant screamed. "He's my lawyer." "Actually," Madeline interjected smoothly, "Mr. Halloway has been on retainer for Kensington Logistics for 20 years. When he realized Apex was a subsidiary of my company, he had to recuse himself. He chose the winning side. Everyone does eventually." Grant's face turned a violent shade of red. The walls were closing in. He lunged for the landline on his desk, but before he could touch it, the heavy oak doors swung open. 2 men walked in. They weren't the usual building security. These were state troopers. "Grant Patrick?" the older officer asked. "Thank God," Grant exhaled, adjusting his tie. "Officer, this woman is trespassing. She is harassing me. Remove her immediately." The officer ignored him and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Mr. Patrick, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding the misappropriation of union pension funds and 3 counts of wire fraud related to the waterfront construction bonds." The room went dead silent. Madeline watched, her face impassive. This was the final nail. She had tipped off the SEC and the Labor Department weeks ago, providing the anonymous documentation that proved Grant had been moving construction funds into his personal offshore accounts to maintain his lavish lifestyle while his workers went unpaid. "Fraud?" Grant stammered, backing away until he hit the window. "No, that's an accounting error. I can explain. Maddie, tell them." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a child caught stealing. "Maddie, please. We were married. I loved you. I took care of you. Don't let them take me." Madeline walked up to him. She was close enough to smell his expensive cologne, a scent that used to make her feel small. Now, it just smelled like desperation. "You didn't take care of me, Grant. You erased me," she whispered. "You told me I was nothing without you. You threw $5 at me in the street to humiliate me. Do you remember?" She reached into her blazer pocket. She pulled out a crumpled, dirty $5 bill. She had kept it in a plastic bag since that day. She tucked the bill into the breast pocket of his suit. "Keep it," she said. "You're going to need it for the commissary." The officers stepped forward, spinning Grant around and clicking the handcuffs onto his wrists. As they marched him out of his own office, he began to weep, loud, ugly sobs that echoed down the hallway. Jessica stood up, grabbing her limited edition Hermes bag. She tried to scurry past Madeline toward the door. "Going somewhere, Jessica?" Madeline asked, without turning around. Jessica froze. She turned, putting on a trembling, tearful smile. "Oh, Miss Burke, I am so sorry. I had no idea he was a criminal. I was a victim, too. He manipulated me just like he did you. I'm so glad you took him down. Girl power, right?" Madeline looked at the young woman. She saw the diamond necklace, the one Grant had bought with money that should have gone to paying his workers. "Leave the bag," Madeline said. "Excuse me?" "The bag, the necklace, the bracelet, the phone." Madeline listed them off. "They were purchased with stolen company funds. They are evidence. If you walk out with them, the officers outside will add you to the indictment as an accessory to wire fraud." Jessica's face paled. With shaking hands, she dropped the bag on the floor. She unclasped the necklace. She placed the phone on the desk. Am I fired?" Jessica whispered. "You were never really hired, Jessica. "You were a decoration," Madeline said. "But I believe in second chances. I'm not going to ruin you. I'm going to give you something Grant never did. A reality check." Madeline picked up a piece of paper from the desk and handed it to her. "This is the address of the Martha Kensington Culinary Academy. It's a vocational school I fund. It trains people for work in industrial kitchens. It's hard work, it's hot, it's loud, and you will smell like onions every day. But if you graduate, I'll hire you in the cafeteria of this building. You can serve lunch to the people who actually work for a living." Jessica stared at the paper. Tears of genuine humiliation welled in her eyes. "You want me to be a lunch lady? I want you to learn what $1 is actually worth," Madeline said, turning her back. "Take it or leave it. But security will escort you out of the building in 2 minutes." Jessica gripped the paper, sobbed once, and ran out of the room. Madeline was finally alone. She walked to the window. Down below, on the busy street, she saw the flashing lights of the police cruiser. She saw the paparazzi swarming the car as Grant was shoved into the back seat. He looked up, just for a second, toward the penthouse window. She knew he couldn't see her through the reflective glass, but she looked him in the eye anyway. She didn't feel the rush of joy she expected. She didn't feel giddy. She just felt clean. The heavy blanket of fear she had carried for 6 years was gone. The door opened behind her. It was her new chief of operations, a stern woman named Elfrida. "Ms. Burke, the board of directors is waiting in conference room B. They want to know your strategy for the merger." Madeline turned away from the window. She smoothed the lapels of her white suit. She looked at the empty desk where Grant had ruled like a tyrant, and then she looked at the portrait of Martha she had hung on the opposite wall. Martha wasn't smiling in the painting. He looked serious, focused, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, seemed to wink. "Burn the chair," Madeline said to Elfrida. "I'm sorry, Mum." "Grant's chair," Madeline said, walking toward the door. "Burn it, and get a new one. Something simple, ergonomic. And tell the board I'll be there in 5 minutes. We're liquidating the luxury division. We're going to pivot Patrick Global into affordable housing development." "Affordable housing?" Elfrida asked, surprised. "The margins are thin on that, Ms. Burke." "The margins on dignity are infinite, Elfrida," Madeline said. She walked out of the office, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. She didn't look back at the empty throne behind her. She had an empire to rebuild, and this time she would build it with steel, sweat, and a heart that, while broken once, had healed stronger than before. As the elevator doors closed, Madeline Burke smiled. It wasn't a smile of revenge. It was the smile of a woman who had finally, truly, come home. And that is how Madeline Burke turned her darkest hour into her greatest victory. She proved that sometimes, when you hit rock bottom, you're actually standing on the foundation of your new empire. If this story gave you chills, if you believe in karma and the power of resilience, hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel. What would you have done if you were Madeline? Would you have forgiven Grant? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about justice served cold. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.